Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Great to have you here for another Saturday live study session. In this video, we're going to be talking about, well, I think it's the second page in our anatomy, muscle anatomy. Last week we talked about the quadriceps, and this week we're going to talk about the glutes and the hamstrings. And we're just kind of moving through this particular lesson in module one. And so, if you would, you can take a look at your screen because now I'm going to share. And let me go ahead and expand this out. All right. So y'all can everybody see my screen? Give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen, guys. So again, this is page 24, and we are going to discuss the gluteal group and the hamstrings. Now, remember, in this part of module one, we're looking basically at what's known as kinesiology. So that's the study of human movement, right? And so when we combine that with exercise, exercise performance, it's just easier to do it by major muscle groups and explain it from that perspective. So understanding the function of the particular muscles, and then what are just some sample exercises, and we try to keep this as quote real world as possible because you know as well as I do, there's 1,000 different exercises you could be doing for any of these muscle groups, but we just don't deal with, you know, 10, 20, 30 different exercises out there. We try to stick with a couple of fundamental basic exercises for the most part. Does that make sense to everybody? So we start with the gluteal group. And why do we do these together? Because they're functional. They work functionally together. So the quads on the front of the thigh, and the glutes and the hamstrings on the posterior aspect of the lower lumbar hip pelvic complex all the way down to the knee. So these two muscle groups are part of what are known as the posterior chain. Raise your hand if you've ever heard that concept. The posterior chain, right? If you're a track and field athlete, if you're a runner, you know you've heard this, right? The posterior chain it starts at your foot. The back of your foot goes all the way up through your erector spinae, all the way up. Technically, the posterior chain is all the way up to your cervical vertebrae and musculature. But these two guys here, these two groups right here, these are your main power muscles that drive you forward. Okay, so the posterior chain is responsible for actually driving you forward. So when you walk or when you run, these are your main propelling muscles. Okay, how many of y'all watched the World Athletic Championships over in Japan recently? Anybody? What?
Mm-mm.
Are you serious? Come on, guys. It's amazing. I definitely recommend you watch some track and field and see the muscular system in action at its highest level. It's absolutely remarkable. I say that because what you'll notice is that when you deal with athletes in particular, particularly sprint athletes, what muscle groups are generally very well developed? These guys, right? The glutes
Yeah,
and the
glutes
hams.
and the hands.
Why? Because they are the main power muscles for driving you forward. So the gluteal group, we call the gluteal group, it's composed of three muscles. Two of them have primary action, and the third one, the minimus, we just throw it in there because it's part of the anatomy. So what we normally say is the gluteus maximus is responsible for obviously the majority of the activity and actions at the hip, right? And so it's, we collectively we would say the gluteus maximus, the medius, and the minimus. You can't really palpate the minimus; it's hard to, but you can easily palpate your gluteus medius. That's that little meaty muscle right on your side. You all know what I'm talking about. It's just lateral and superior to the gluteus maximus. Now watch. Can everybody see my cursor? I'm gonna Try and point
Mm.
this to you. I don't know if you guys can see this little gray area right here, right above the gluteus maximus, right
Yeah, I can see it.
here. That's pretty much where the gluteus medius is. And then underneath that is the gluteus minimus, which is really more responsible for stabilization of the hip joint itself, right inside the socket of the hip joint. But collectively, we say that though that group of muscles do the following: they stabilize the hip. And when I say stabilize the hip, I'm talking about the entire, what we call the LPHC, or the lumbopelvic hip complex. Okay. So that includes pretty much the entire lower back, the spinal column that goes into the pelvic bone itself, even into the femur, so the hip joint. So it basically stabilizes that. And the main stabilizer is going to be the gluteus maximus. Okay. I think you guys know that already. They are also responsible for hip external rotation. Okay. And by the way, we're not going to train hip external rotation. You all know that, right? We're not training it. We're not going to do exercises where you literally externally rotate your femur. That's not what we do. Now, it's not a bad idea to do stretching and to stretch out the internal rotators and the external rotators, but that's flexibility training. Right now, we're just saying that these muscle groups collectively are going to assist with the external rotation. And that's why we don't get into this too deep, because when we're talking about exercise performance, we're really just talking about squats and lunges, which are going to have minimal, if any, rotational movement of the femur, right, while you're performing the exercise. There is some, but not enough for a personal trainer to be too concerned about. The main the main kinesiological function that we're interested in, though, or two main, to a certain extent, two main functions, is hip extension and hip abduction. Is everybody familiar with those two kinesiological terms? Hip extension and hip abduction, or abduction. Raise your hand, please. Say yes, yes. If you know what those movements are,
Mm-mm.
you understand how important it is that we know and understand proper exercise performance. So, for the most part, hip extension, the easiest way to think about it is if you're sitting down like we all are right now, when you stand up, a couple of things happen simultaneous, right? Your knee, which is bent, your knee extends. Yes, everybody with me? Do I need
Yes.
to do it? No. So when I go to stand up, there's a couple of things but the two main things that happen is my knee, because I'm sitting down, my knee extends, I go into extension, and what happens at my hip? My hip extends as well, because remember, in a seated position, let me see if I can do this. In a seated position, I got my upper body, right? That's my
Mm-hmm.
torso, and this is my legs, right? My upper legs. So I'm sitting like this, and then I stand up and I do this, right? Does everybody see that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Pretty simple. So hip extension is when you go from this flex position, like 90 degrees between the torso and the upper leg, moves to a position of 180 degrees. So the angle between the torso and the femur, or the upper leg, is now going to be 180 degrees. So you're just straightening it out. But it's important that you understand the terminology. That's called hip extension. So, what exercise mimics what I just explained? The squat, right? By the
Mm-hmm.
way, ladies and gentlemen, the squat is the exercise. As long as a person can do it without any pain or discomfort, you're doing squats with people every single time you train them. On your leg, quote, if you're doing a leg day, for instance, you're using resistance training, correct? Is everybody with me?
Mm-hmm.
What about on the
Yes.
days that you're not doing resistance training for the legs, but you're just doing cardio? Are you going to do squats? Heck yeah, you are, but you're not going to use any weight. You'll do jump squats, you'll do all these. So the squat is the premier movement that you should be doing with people almost every single time you train them. either without resistance and you're using it as a calisthenic type of exercise or a cardio exercise, or you're using resistance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So, so hip extension, the primary job of the gluteus maximus is to provide hip extension or to perform hip extension. Okay, so yes, the gluteus maximus by pretty much by weight is probably one of the biggest muscles in the body. Obviously, size wise, it's a very, very dense, self contained muscle, right? Bilaterally. Now, your latissimus dorsi, on the other hand, is probably, I would say, by weight, kind of close. Would be the second largest muscle, but the gluteus maximus is going to be by far one of the most powerful and perhaps, dependent on the person, the heaviest muscle, skeletal muscle in the human body. So, that's just for added interest, just so y'all know. So, does everybody get this? So the gluteal group, the gluteus maximus is basically that is the primary hip extensor muscle. Y'all get this? So the gluteus medius, however, is responsible for hip abduction. It's one of the main abductors and external rotators at the hip. It's not the primary, but it does aid in lifting your leg out to the side. Does that make sense? We're not going to get into that because I'm not going to recommend that you train clients on hip abduction, for instance. You don't have to train abductors and adductors. I remember many, many years ago when a equipment manufacturer came out with these machines where you sat down and you were able to do inner and outer thigh. Does everybody remember those?
Oh
Do they
yeah,
still
they
do
still
they
have
still have
some of them.
those? Do they still have
Yes,
those
they do.
things?
24-hour fitness.
Totally. I mean, this is my personal opinion. You don't have to listen to me if you don't want. That's the worst use of 416, about 20 square feet of space in a health club. That's absolutely ridiculous. And by the way, please don't have people sitting there putting those things on their legs and shifting your leg out on the cable machine. Please don't do that stuff. You're not doing anything. You're not doing
Right.
anything that Derek, I know you ain't doing that. You're not doing anything efficient and functional. I hope you guys understand this.
I
Remember,
got one. Okay, so the reason why I do them, and I don't know about everybody else, but I had broke my femur bone. So I broke my femur bone while I got a ride, and it comes down from my hip all the way to my knee. So it kind of like
were you told to do it by a physical therapist or your doctor?
a little bit of physical therapy.
If they
So
recommended it to you,
yeah,
totally different, right?
all right,
Totally
cool.
different. But yeah, the idea is that for the average client, of course, we're not doing those things. By the way, how much time do you have to train people? This is another big issue, and this is one of the reasons why it's important that we talk about these exercises. How much time do you have to train a client? Realistically, Stephen, how much? Sivan, how much?
Hour and a half.
Do you know how long it
Well,
takes
it
me to train
depends
a
the
client on
program.
resistance? Do you know how much resistance training we do?
That's not
20 minutes. 20, 25 minutes is all you ever do with a client, the average client. Now, if you're an athlete, I'm going to train you differently. But see, with an hour of time, Sivan, you have to find different exercises to do, right? But what if I didn't give you a whole lot of rest? What if right when I'm doing an exercise like squats, I give you about 10 seconds to rest and then I throw you into another guess what's going to happen after about 10, 15 minutes? You already know. If you're not puking, you're walking around and thinking about puking, especially on a leg day, right? Now, guys, you're going to see this more when you're in lesson 6 of this module. But the point is that generally we don't train people for more than 30 minutes max, for the average client, Sivan. So just so you guys know, when we're training people, we can beat them up real good in just that amount of time. So
Is
go
that
ahead.
without like the rest times in between is what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. So that's
Oh,
that like hour because I'm saying in like a session. So in
oh
between
yeah.
that, like
No, in one session, 1 o'clock you come in. I'll give you an example.
okay.
So it's going to be an hour session. So yeah, an hour session, but I'm going to do 5 minutes of warm up, roughly. I like to stretch people a little bit, whatever body part they're stretching. So that's another five, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. That's 10 minutes. So it's 10 after one. Now, what am I going to do? Now I'm going to do about 25 minutes of resistance training. And keep in mind, guys, we we're riding on the backs of the past 50 years of competitive bodybuilding paradigms. Because how much time did Arnold spend in the gym? 2 hours, an hour and a half. I don't know, whatever, but totally ridiculous. So that paradigm of spending longer and longer times and doing higher and higher volumes doesn't work. So now I'm going to spend 25 minutes and I'm going to reduce the amount of rest time. See, Yvonne. So the more time I can get out from resting, the more efficient the workout, and actually the better the outcomes for my clients.
More
Because
muscle there, right? Like
they're not bodybuilders. And by the way, they're not power lifters.
yeah.
So, and we'll talk about it more, but the volume and intensity dichotomy that we deal with really becomes more volumetric. So, what we're doing today, and we've been doing this for a couple of decades now, is we've backed off on the total amount of volume we inflict on individuals with resistance training. And in fact, that total volume of training that we do is probably a third of what it used to be when I first started training people, to the point now where we emphasize muscle endurance training with lower resistance, way over the heavier training. I used to train people like bodybuilders. These are clients, 50, 60-year-old individuals, and we'd be training them with these high volume. Yeah, and you just beat them up too much. So we'll do that 25 minutes of training. And by the way, after you do a set of squats, that's why it's important to know this on this particular video. After a set of squats, how do you feel? If you did it right, you're wiped. You're wiped. You want 10
Mhm.
seconds, 15, 30. You'll rest for a minute, even 2 minutes. We don't want that. We want to train people to have more efficient recovery time. So we will get them we'll give them a break, a little bit of a break, but then we're going to get them right back in to another exercise. And that will generate higher levels of lactate. But lactate buffering is a system that needs to be developed. So there's an adaptive component to this that we really want clients to figure out, and that's the adaptive buffering systems for lactate development. You guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Mhm.
Now, we used to say lactic acid, but that's not technically correct. Lactic acid is the primary end product of the anaerobic glycolytic system, but it quickly converts into lactate in the blood system very quickly. So we look at blood lactate levels, not lactic acid levels. Lactic acid essentially stays in the muscle and gets converted. Only lactate can get pulled through the liver for reconversion back into glucose. We looked at lactate levels. And so you get very high levels of lactate, and it is acidic, and it needs to be buffered by carbonate. And that's the body's buffering system, right? Acidic basic buffering. And so the better you guys, you get better at it. You know that, right? Your body adapts to that. We want our clients. How do you adapt your body to be more efficient at buffering lactate? How do you do it? Less rest time between bouts of training. You'll get that?
Mhm.
Please go like this. Please say yes.
Yes.
Okay. It's actually really simple. While you're still breathing heavy and you're just starting to get your breath, and I know you want to go talk to James because he's over there doing dumbbell curls, and you're like, oh, James, I just did a great. No, no, you don't go and talk to James. You get back on the squat rack, and before you fully recover, you do another set. And guess what you just did? You now are teaching your body how to adapt to this increased lactate load in the blood system. Here's the beauty of it. It doesn't take more than a couple of weeks to notice a very significant difference in your ability to recover quickly from a set. Is everybody with me on that? I probably went way over on what we needed to because we were talking about muscles, weren't we? Something like that. All right. Sorry about that, guys. I just get so excited when I talk about this stuff. It's so cool. Okay, so what are we even talking about? Okay, so that's your glutes, right? Your glutes do what? Hip extension. And now the gluteus maximus might be a little bit involved with hip abduction, but technically it's the gluteus medius that is the assistant or helper when it comes to hip abduction. So you'll notice in the sample exercises, by the way, what don't you see, Derek? What don't we see? Yeah, we don't see like leg abduction, and we don't see abductor and adductors and things like that, right? Because we're not doing those with our clients. We're just not going to do those. And I'm not saying you can never do it. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying be very careful and be efficient with your time. Okay, we want to do generally compound exercises, compound movements, particularly when we're talking about these muscle groups. So you get a lot of muscle working in a shorter period of time, which is just going to benefit your client. So now we move to the hamstrings. There are 3 muscles in the hamstrings. Normally, what I like to do for fun is have everybody try to pronounce the bottom 2, but we're not going to do that today because I don't want you to, embarrass yourself on a video that people will be watching. So yeah, you can. There you go, Sivan. Go ahead and try and speak it out. Okay, those 3 muscles are. This is the easy one. The biceps femoris, right? Femur bone, biceps, and biceps femoris, just like the biceps brachii on your arm is a double-headed. It's got 2 main heads, so it has 2 separate neurological inputs, so they can work with and assisting each other, and they have different origins. So the origin is going to be closest to the midline of the body, and so there are 2 heads. One of the origins crosses over the hip, right, and starts and secures itself in the lower part of the pelvis. And then the shorter head of the biceps femoris actually originates on the femur itself. So one of the heads crosses over, which is why it's an extensor at the hip. This guy is the semi-membranosus. Can everybody say that? Yes? Semi-membranosus. Man, I tell you what, you'll be the boss at kids' parties when you start talking about this stuff, right? You point to a kid's hamstring, you go, that's your semi-membranosus. And then the semi-tendinosus, okay? Semi-membranosus, semi-tendinosus. All 3 of those muscles, guys, all 3 of those muscles essentially do 1 or 2 main things. Well, it's really 2. But we will normally say that the hamstring's primary function is to flex the knee. You all get this? So the insertion of a muscle is generally where we determine its main action. So the origin of the muscle is where the tendon attachment is closest to the midline of the body. The insertion of a muscle is distal to the origin, and it crossovers a joint. Got it? So with the hamstrings, it originates in what's known as, well, at least the long head of the biceps femoris, the pelvic tuberosity, which is the lowest part, that bony prominence at the very bottom of the pelvic bone, and that's where they insert into. And then, that's where they originate, and then they insert and cross over the knee. So the biceps femoris technically is a knee flexor. They are the primary knee flexors, okay? However, they also, because they cross over the hip joint, assist in hip extension. Everybody got that? Do they do more than that? Yeah, pretty much every muscle has about 3 or 4 multiple functions, because depending on the position you're in, they can help and assist with abduction or adduction, internal, external rotation. We don't care about that because we're trainers and we're trying to do exercises with people. So as everybody see, flex the knee, extend the hip. Now, the sample exercises, and again, this is where I want you to focus. If I'm talking to a new trainer that's going out there on the floor and going to do exercises with folks, I'm going to tell them you've got three main exercises to work, these muscle groups. The first is always going to be something like a stiff-legged deadlift. You can do good mornings, but you got to be very, very careful with them. So you're going to do some sort of stiff-legged deadlift, not straight legs. You see what I put there? Meaning the knee is slightly bent at all times, but it is in that position the entire movement. Okay, so how many of you do stiff leg deadlifts to train your hamstrings? Anybody? Yeah, you got to get to the lesson. You got to get to the lesson where you'll see a video and I'll show it to you. By the way, use barbells, dumbbells. It doesn't matter. But that's a standard. That is a go-to what we call meat and potato exercise. Now, I did not put it on this page because I have it here. This is the page before. But another main exercise, one of the primary exercises to train the gluteus maximus are squats. In fact, by the way, what other exercise don't you see on that list that everybody does today?
Hip thrusts.
Yes. How many of y'all do hip thrusts because you've watched it on
I
TikTok?
love hip thrusts.
Yeah.
I feel on fire when I do those.
You feel your glutes really working when you do those, right? You'll notice we don't put those on there. Why? Why would you think?
Mm.
They're not a bad exercise. And by the way, with athletes, with track and field sprinters, we do those and we do reverse extensions with the feet moving up and not the torso. So we do a number of different, but those are for athletes, right? So the reason we don't put that in there is because when we are training someone's legs, by the time you get through with squats, lunges, maybe leg curls, but stiff-legged deadlifts, 4 or 5 exercises, how much time do you generally have left to train somebody? Not a whole lot. And so nothing wrong with the exercise per se from a biomechanical perspective, but we're also thinking efficiency when we train people. Now, Sivan, if I've got an hour and I don't care, you're going to pay me for however long it takes me to train, I can do 10 different exercises, yes? But you got to think realistically and efficiency with your clients. We definitely want to get them out 20 to 25 minutes of resistance training. Don't do any more than that, folks. You will overdo it with your clients. And if you train them hard and you don't give them a lot of rest time, they're getting more than enough from 4, 5, or 6 exercises. Trust, especially if they're squats. So squats, lunges, stiff-legged deadlifts, those are my 3 biggies that I do for legs. But in general, we're going to train those glutes very, very hard at the bottom of the squat where you have maximum flexion of the hip, which means the gluteus maximus is getting stretched. You all get that? There's a little bit of confusion in your eyes, but remember, if the kinesiological function of a muscle is this, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, if that's its kinesiological function, then how do you stretch the muscle? With the opposite of that kinesiological function. So if the kinesiological function of my glutes is hip extension, what do I have to do to stretch my gluteus maximus? Hip flexion. And what is hip flexion? That's the bottom part of a squat. You guys get that? That's why when you're doing squats with people, when you get to the bottom position, what should you do? Pause. Yeah, don't bounce out of it and don't try and get out of there as fast as you can. You come down and you pause because we know there's greater cross-bridging muscle activation when a muscle is lengthened, not when it's shortened. That's why you guys don't come up on a squat and squeeze your glutes. What are you doing? Nothing. Actually, you can potentially hurt yourself. So does that make sense to everybody? Everybody understands kind of the functioning of the glutes and the hamstrings, yes? Now,
Yes.
when you move into NASM and ACE, they will go into a little bit more about issues related to discrepancies in muscle strength, things like this, and they have what a term called synergistic dominance. And synergistic dominance is simply a fancy way of saying that when you're doing lower body exercises, your hamstrings start to take over the primary kinesiological function of the gluteus maximus, and that's because the glutes become weak, they become elongated, they don't have the same neural drive that they should have, and so they kind of put out, and the hamstrings take over. It's called synergistic dominance.
Mm.
It doesn't happen in too many other muscles that I know of, but for the most part, that's the main issue that we see, is that because you sit a lot, your glutes lengthen and they have a reduced neural drive, which means they're just not going to be as strong. And so now the hamstrings got to do most of the work. And the hamstrings are not meant to be the primary hip extensor muscles. The glutes are. Does that make sense, everybody? So what do you got to
Mm-hmm.
do? Yeah, you got to train the glutes. And yes, bridges, are a great way to do that if you do have somebody with those issues. Make sense? Okay, guys. Appreciate you all
So,
coming on
Doug, I have a
board. Yes, yeah,
question.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I have a question. So,
Yes.
how many repetitions should you be doing on hamstring and gluteus? What is the maximum in
I don't
sets that you
know.
should
I don't
be doing?
know the answer to that, Carissa, but we do have some standards that we use. So and remember, I'm saying this in general for the average we're not talking about athletes. We're talking about the average person just trying to lose weight, stay in shape. We're not going to go any higher than about 20 reps, 15 repetitions for any muscle group.
Mm.
And we're probably not going to go much lower than 10 or 8 reps. This is very general. That's a wide range, isn't it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes
Um,
sense. Okay.
and so, but again, even if I say 20 reps, how are you performing those repetitions? Are you doing them quickly? Are you doing them slow on the negative, pausing in the stretch, coming up on? You get the idea. But those are kind of the numbers that we use. There's a concept called time under tension, which is really what we try to use. And so it's irrelevant how many reps. If I can keep the muscle under tension in its range of motion for 30 seconds, a minute, something like that, then it doesn't really matter how many repetitions I do in a
Mm.
sense. That's a lot of information with not enough explanation. So I want you to just keep in mind those numbers. Generally, we don't do any higher than about 15 to 20 reps. And we're not going to go any lower than, I mean, for most people, for myself, I never go any lower than 10, even 12. For me, at my age and 45 years of exercising, training with weights, I can't use heavy weights. So for most people, they're going to be moderately light for them, and you're going to keep them in the 12, 15, upwards of 20. As people become more adapted to that type of training, they'll be able to do higher and higher repetitions. At some point, and that's why we kind of stick at 20, above 20, you're probably using too little resistance to make it worth your time in that 20 to 25 minutes. You got it?
Okay.
Um,
All right. I was
does-
just curious.
Yeah. So those are your numbers, and you'll hear different numbers from. I'm not so concerned about how many you do above 12, 15, or 20. That's not my issue. You just don't want to be going any lower than 10 or 8, because the lower the repetition range is assuming what about the resistance? It's going up.
Mm.
And so what happens when we increase the resistance of any exercise? What happens to injury potential?
It's higher.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't care if it's a 5-pound dumbbell or a 10-pound dumbbell, you can still get hurt. 10 pounds is more dangerous than 5 pounds every day of the week. It doesn't matter. It's heavier, which means it puts extra load and stress on the muscles. Therefore, it increases the load on the tendons. And that's great when you're not causing injury, but it can be problematic. So we modulate that and we say that if you can only do 4 reps on a bench press, that's way too heavy. You're not a power lifter, are you? And that's the only person that I would ever do it with anyway. Literally a competitive power lifter. Those are the only individuals that I ever trained that I would ever do 8 repetition 6 or triples or even singles before a competition. So does that help?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Whew. All right, guys. Thanks for coming on board this Saturday. If you have not done so, please make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will see y'all next week. Have a great weekend, guys. See ya.
All right. Thank you. You too, Doug.
All right, guys. Hold on a second. Hold on.